Welcome to Keep the Hotel Empty. Today we've kept the hotel empty for possibly the dearest friend of the show, the first guy that was on twice, and now the first gentleman to be on 3 times, Mr. Dennis Brock. Dennis, welcome back, my friend.
Well, I am very glad to be here.
Oh, man. This is an incredibly timely, no pun intended, conversation for us to have, and I'm grateful for you to be here, too. We got a lot of topics we want to kind of just meander through today, but Dennis reminded me of something before we started, and very poignant phrase from a song, "This ain't no disco." This ain't no fooling around. And we are definitely at that crossroads, and I think a lot of people feel that, and I think there's a lot of topics that intertwine with that. And the first one I want to start with is probably a weighty one for everybody, and it's time. There was just to keep with our theme of lyrics here, there's a lyric by a gentleman called Devin Townsend, and it's from a song struck me years ago, and he said, "Time is a human construct." And I think that's something that's probably obvious to all of us, but something we all forget. And I kind of want to talk or ask you about your perception of time and how it is governing and defining things that we do when we know it's fully made up.
You know, there are people who would believe everything's made up, that it's all a hologram and the whole scene.
Well, simulation theory is a place I wanted to get to in this conversation. So,
time has always been an enemy of mine. When I was younger, it didn't move fast enough, and when I got older, it was moving too quickly. Einstein reminds us about putting our hand on a hot stove, if you want to think about time in a relative fashion, versus being next to a beautiful woman. Time is relative. It's extremely relative. And as you know, the closer you get to the speed of light, the more time is stretched.
right.
Time is elastic. And what the Buddhists and others call the between, where you're in between lives, where you haven't been reincarnated yet, time is meaningless. It's just here. We're stuck to it.
Right.
Einstein says it's the way it keeps everything from happening all at once. It gets dragged out. And when we look at time as far as our species goes, we see 200,000 or 300,000 years we're supposed to have been the way we are right now, which was Homo sapiens sapiens, which basically means the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop. We are as good as it gets. I guess if there was another iteration of mankind, it would be 3 sapiens, perhaps, but we're the best there is. But we're constricted in time, and we're given a lot of time. We're given an awful lot of time, but the way it changes, you know, it's funny, I was reading Shirley MacLaine's book the other day, and she said time is moving faster. And I had to think about that for a moment. The truth of the matter is if everybody perceives time as accelerating, then it actually is in some ways, if you think of quantum mechanics.
Right.
But for me, it's been an enemy because when I was younger, I couldn't wait till I could get out of school. And now and there was a point in your life when you say to yourself, okay, I'm becoming less every day. You realize that?
Yeah.
I'm becoming less. My hair is falling out. I'm shorter. I'm getting fatter. My stomach. Oh, and then vanity steps in like a mother.
Yeah.
But it's an enemy to me now. And it was an enemy to me when I was younger. I wish I could stop it like a channel change, a remote control, like that movie that time.
What do you think accounts for the perception of passage of time?
Without memories, there isn't any. You have to be able to remember something as placed in your past, even if it's where you put your keys. It's all come down to what you can remember. If you can't remember anything, then time means nothing to you. And if you remember too much, then time has been exaggerated. I'm not sure, really.
Yeah, it's such a... The reason why I asked that and where I'm digging with this one is I struggle sometimes with our ability to perceive time and what it means, yet we have everything around us governed by that. I always look at someone's death as just a marker of time, like someone's birth, conversely.
Right.
So I guess I'm kind of driving at why we even do time. Here's a thing that came across my bow recently. There's a gentleman who says that it used to take us weeks to send a letter across the country, months to get a package, things of this nature, and that's when we derived this 24-hour day. Well, now we can do things so much faster. I can send a message in a second. I can break my day up into 3 8-hour chunks, and now I've just made up a new day, and I've got 3 times the life you do.
Yeah, but that's a slippery slope. When does it stop? When is it too much? When do you want to say slow down? I want to get off the merry-go-round.
Right.
And I think we're at that point now where many of us want to get off the merry-go-round. That perhaps every contraption we have now, and particularly our phones, accelerates time for us, compresses time for us. And maybe we needed the opposite, time to think about something. And with the assault of the phone in our hands every 5 seconds, that part of our brain doesn't get any exercise. The shutdown, and let's just think about something, almost a meditation, I don't know if any of us can reach that state anymore because of the constant stimulation of the phones.
Right.
And I see the phones as a serious problem, and I think they accelerate time, and they force us to make decisions and say things that we would not normally make and not normally say. We didn't have the time to think about it. But time is so subjective.
Right.
It really is.
You bring up a really interesting point. Do you feel that the way society and things like the phone and social media going now are creating a ubiquitous nature of the pressure of time, this idea of, I guess it kind of incentivizes us to be more reactionary?
It forces us to play the game, and then everybody else is playing.
Yeah.
Which is how much stuff can we do? How much stuff can we gather? How many places can we go? How much money can we gather?
What do you think the nature of that is? We had a woman in here recently who has a bone to pick with capitalism. Do you think it's just as simple as we've just got ourselves brainwashed and our old, for want of a better way of putting it, hunter-gatherer tendencies are just making us greedy in a new way?
Eric Fromm talks about that, how we keep score. We keep score on how many things we collect. And that is not going to do it. As spiritual creatures, we need more than that. But as human vessels, that's how we keep score. And it's absurd.
Mm.
How many trips have you had? How many nice cars have you owned?
Right.
How many bedrooms are in your house? These are the way the average man keeps score on his life. And the Buddhists will tell you that's just not the way to do it. If you go back to fundamental Judaism or fundamental Christianity, it'll tell you it's not the way to do it. From what I can recall, Jesus was buried in the tomb belonging to his great uncle, who was a very wealthy man, was a tin merchant at the time. Tin was very valuable. Speaking of time, I had read, and I think it's true, that people who incarnate, when they spend that time in between, they may spend many, many years there before they decide to come back to the earth. Some of them don't want to come back. I can think of a few who would not want to come back. Theodor Herzl would be one of them.
Mm.
He was the man who came up with the concept that the Jews will never be saved unless they have their own land, they have their own space. And it is written in some of the books that I've read that many people waited out the Middle Ages. They didn't want to come back because nothing had changed.
Right.
For hundreds of years. Which get me back to something I wanted to talk about today is the God gene.
Yes. Please. That's something I'm curious about as well.
This is how I see it. We've been interfered with many, many times, at least on 4 or 5 occasions. This is an abrupt rise in change to our DNA that occurred about 4,500 years ago, where we were running a nice, smooth, inclined plane over thousands of years of changes in our DNA, very slight, very slight. And then all of a sudden, straight up, about 4,500 years ago. The Yellow Book, which is, like I told you before we came in here today, is virtually an underground book, and it talks about 4 or 5 times that they have interfered with us. And changes that should have taken a great deal of time occurred in those terms overnight. We became super intelligent, but we were still apes at heart.
Right. This is the time period you're talking that would coincide with like the stoned ape theory.
There were 4 series. It's in there somewhere. I could read it. I could give you the times and dates, but there's at least 4 times where they more or less jacked us up.
Well, that kind of dovetails into some of the other things I wanted to talk with you about.
What's that?
Do you see that as these times the outside influences were extraterrestrial, like the theory of the Anunnaki and things like that?
Yes, the Anunnaki were a real thing. And the question is, where do they come from?
Right.
I think they've been interfering with us all along, different groups at different times. I don't think there's been that much consistency over the millennium as to who was coming to see us. You have to picture the cosmos. Jet black, nothing there, supposedly. Little balls of light. One of those little balls of light looks different than the rest. It looks very different. First of all, the moon is ridiculously large for that size of a planet and in a very smooth orbit. And is a very circular moon. It's almost as if it's put there to regulate the Earth in some way, which it was. That's a whole nother story.
Well, I had recently, and maybe you can touch on this, I had recently seen a video that was describing the uniqueness of our moon and trying to attribute it that it was a broken off chunk of our own planet from one point.
When you go to the grand wizard, the computer, the wizard only has a few answers to things.
Right.
Sometimes it only has one answer. And that answer is absurd. And that's the answer they go to every single time. And they tell you how it's tidal locked. You know, Jupiter has 80 moons. Only a few of them are tidal locked. And tidal lock can mean more or less. It's not an absolute. All that really means is that it stays in rhythm with the Earth, showing its same face as the Earth rotates. It rotates with it, locked to it. Mm. But here's the thing about that. There's so much there to tell you that moon has a function. That moon is there, and life on Earth could not exist without that moon.
Right.
Okay, that's the first thing. There's a tilt that goes, there's a wobble to the tilt, like a child's toy, a child's top when you spin it. And as it slows down, it starts to wobble on its axis. Mm-hmm. Well, you cannot have agriculture and have that, because your seasons will be all over the map. You can't have it wobbling. Now, the only moon that's big enough that we know of in the whole universe, the moon to the mass of the Earth, it is so large that it keeps that tilt from occurring. It keeps that tilt from happening. That is incredible. And if you look at the other things that are just, some things are like right in your face that you don't see them.
Right.
They are right there. How can it be on the same arc and be exactly the same size within a mile, 4,000 times further away the sun is? And it matches the shape of the moon. I think they said the moon is 2,160 miles in diameter. If it were 2,159 or 2,161, you would not have that a corona effect. That corona effect is very, very hard to get. A corona effect when you suddenly, the moon passes before the sun, and in one blink of an eye, the only thing coming towards you on Earth is the light of the corona itself.
Right.
And for it to do that in the first place is like 1 in a million. And to be on the same trajectory, to match up to it and to cast that shadow on the earth, again, 1 in a million. And I've always had a natural understanding of physics. I know how physics work. That's how I've been repairing things my whole life. I made a living repairing microscopes. First I was repairing furniture, then I'm repairing microscopes. I know how things work. I know how physics work. If you look at the planet, the moon itself, and you look at other moons, something's very, very different about it. First of all, it's ridiculously round. The rest of them are not. They're malformed. Most of them are captured asteroids, so they tend to be malformed to begin with.
Exactly right.
But to say something coalesced, perfectly round, is ridiculous. That all this mass gathered together for the natural attraction of mass in a vacuum, gathered and coalesced into a perfect sphere? No. When I look at the moon, in my physics mind's eye, I see that none of those craters go very deep. Every single crater maxes out at the same depth. And you add to that the experiments when it rang like a bell, when they dropped, I think they dropped one of the stages of the lunar rover, one of the pieces. They dropped it onto the planet. They had a seismograph there, and it rang for a while. And so, ridiculous. They came back and they tried it on purpose, and it rang again. The inside of the moon may be hollow. And the way it maintains that perfect position with its face to our planet, no matter how many thousands of years go by, is pretty strange. The fact that it's the exact arc, the exact orbit, the exact size it needs to be, no. And the fact that life on Earth would not be able to exist without it, that it is a governor, in essence, to this planet. The tides are really important. We don't know that because we're stupid. People don't know how this planet works. What if this planet were alive? I watched a show on Japanese sword making the other day, and everybody who touched the sword or had anything to do with the really incredible instruments that they were making said that they were alive. They believe they're alive. What if they are in essence? What if it's a form of life we don't recognize? But what if it is alive? Then why couldn't the planet be alive?
Well, it seems more logical to accept that it would be.
It is more that it's an organism. What you'd have to do is attach a sentient nature to that organism. It thinks, it reacts, it defends itself. If you read some of the books I've read about people who've been transgressed back in time, Dolores Cannon wrote a whole series of these wonderful books. She describes Qumran. She describes what the Essenes were doing there. She describes how Jesus was taught by the Essenes, and that's why he carried their philosophy. And she describes things we don't have today, like using crystals to heal. She describes using music to move things, or in other words, sound to move things.
Right.
I believe that's possible. There's no way they could have built the things that we attribute to them without a lot of help. A lot of help.
And some kind of understanding that we've lost somewhere along the way.
We used to be so much smarter. That's what people don't get. We were more intuitive. There were people who could tell when you were lying right off the bat. They would put them in courts and say, okay, we're going to make you the official lie detector. This is way back in time. People who have transgressed have talked about that. People knew how to heal. People knew how to tell the future. People had such... We have lost everything because we've been aided out of it.
Yeah, okay, so that's really the operative bit of this from my curiosity.
I have another one for you.
Okay, shoot.
The brain is a muscle. If you don't exercise the muscle atrophies. During the Middle Ages, the muscle atrophied for everybody except certain groups of people who kept themselves alive intellectually. And then those people were murdered because they weren't as sick as the rest of them.
Right.
Comes to mind are the Jews. All right? In the Middle Ages, the only people who could read or write were the clergy and the Jews. The only people, and the Jews could read more than one language. They taught their kids to read 2 or 3 languages. They taught their kids music. They had instruments. They had violins. They even had a piano, like my family had, which was taken from them, and what was called a pogrom, and that's a whole nother story. We should talk about that one day.
Well, I'm curious about your thoughts on some of these things, interconnectedness, and sound is a big one for me. I'm sure you've seen these experiments where they transduce sound through water, and it makes a perfect
right. It speaks to you.
Yeah, and the same thing with sand. If you put sand on a plate and put just bow the side of the plate, it'll make these wonderful concentric
The
patterns.
vibrations manifest themselves beautifully.
Yeah, and I feel like that is one of the clues to the things we don't see that are happening all of the time.
I have the tuning forks that you hit and put on your points, the top of your head, third eye location, solar plexus, and further down. Big tuning forks, creating vibrations. We are vibrational creatures. They don't know that. They don't get that. You know about Royal Rife, don't you? He was.
I don't.
Oh, wow. Royal Rife, in the 50s, he was working with disease. He was a master microscope maker. He made a microscope nobody could ever make since then. It's never been reproduced. Made 2 or 3 of them, and they somehow disappeared. He would look through his microscope, and he could see a live virus. You can't see live virus with the regular microscope. It's much too small. And then he would broadcast different wavelength frequencies onto the stage plate, attacking the organism. And then he would observe how they reacted to the vibrations. And there were specific wavelengths that would destroy specific organisms.
Right.
Now, I think, let's say you're an alien race and you look down and you say, well, we gave them a chance. They ruined this planet. We're going to have to tent the place. We're going to use this vibration. This is the exact vibration. It would just kill only humans. Everybody else will be fine. But then we got to clean up the place. It'll be a terrible mess. But think how much better it'll be for everybody. They ruined the planet.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that with my life was with music and acoustics and things, has always intrigued me that we are so much water, and when the vibration moves through us, if you're conscious of it, it is literally arranging your insides. And
water's magical.
Yeah.
It is.
So touch on that a little bit.
Well, does water have a memory? That's another question, too. And what happened to Jericho? Oh, those are 2 completely different subjects. The walls of Jericho came tumbling down when they marched around and they all blew their horns at one time. And the walls collapsed. Total fiction, right? It's interesting that they were using vibrations to bring the walls down. And when you read about the Essene, and you read Dolores Cannon's accounts of people who said they were there, they had a weapon that would keep the occasional stranger at bay, but they would not say anything more about it other than it was based on sound. So sound has uses. Especially since what you bring up is that we're mostly. What's the percentage of water on the planet? What is it? 70%. The water, the Earth is covered 70% by water. We're higher than that. I would think that to other aliens, they would look at us as rather watery.
Yeah.
And they would say, "Oh my God, they got to go to the bathroom every 5 hours."
What's that all about?
Too much water in these people.
Yeah. Well, just to bring this one a little bit full circle, do you feel that, or what are your thoughts on the entities that have been here and helped us create this upward curve like this?
It's been a total.
Do you think that
intergalactic kegger here? Okay, I'm telling you, everybody from everywhere. Can I tell you why that happened?
Sure.
First, we're gorgeous. We're like a jewel. The planet Earth is so beautiful. Okay, that you'd have to be an idiot not to recognize that it was special, and you'd want to go there. If you were from another race, you'd want to go there. Now, time, the Earth's been around, 5 billion years? That's a lot of time for visitors.
Right. And that's the thing I wanted to ask about this.
Time. We've only been around a flash. A flash.
And from the outsider's perspective, if you think there are people out there who, or I should say beings out there who can exist and recognize a fourth dimension, then their perception of our time is even more of a blink, potentially.
Time would be meaningless to them if they could travel interdimensionally. Time wouldn't matter to them.
Right.
It is a particularly human thing to get involved with.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there has to be, for something, this is kind of the operative point for the time thing for me. For something that is such a governing part of our lives and our world at the moment, it seems that all of the bigger picture things have to just negate time. They cannot be relative to time at all.
There's no way to relax. There's just no way to relax if you're worried about time. Like what you did, picking up the kids. I got to get up at 7 o'clock tomorrow. Oh, I got a flight. Time is almost like bondage to civilization. It bonds us to these constraints, these dictates. When you get up, when you have lunch, when you have dinner. When's the game on? Time is completely ruling over us. And I think that's wrong, but I don't know how to get out of it. I mean, even myself, when you're having a good time, there isn't enough of it.
Right.
And when you're suffering, when you're sitting in the dentist chair and you're waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, we need to get over that. I think if we were better at meditating, all of us, we could handle that better. We don't handle it right. I don't think there's anything in our lives that can train us to handle it. In fact, everything is pushing us and pushing us. There's this. We're always being driven by tides. It's the bell curve you got to worry about, not the lunatics on either end. They're always going to exist. It's the people in the middle, where they sway, where they go, what they believe. For instance, just being Jewish at this time of the year, you're not in that bell curve.
No.
You're standing outside watching everybody ride the wave, and you have to smile and be happy about it and go about your way. But you're aware that there's a difference between you and them, and that it is this time that this happens every year, where they say, and to all our Jewish friends, Happy Hanukkah, and they go about their life as if we didn't exist. And, I'm not a fan of dogma, even my own people's dogma.
No.
I don't really fit, and I've never expected to fit.
Either have I. I think that's a better way to do it.
It is. That is the most unnarcissistic thing you can do.
Right.
Is you don't give a damn if they like you or not.
Yeah. You have no control over it, so.
What are you going to do? You're not going to live for them.
So when you have these times where you can't help but notice the oddity in the ways that we've been shuffled like this, where half the world's going about one thing and half the world's going about another. You hit on a big word there, dogma. How much do you think at this point our dogma is really siloing us off?
I think dogma atrophies the brain.
Because it limits our reasons to think?
It eliminates it. Yeah, it mimics it, but by mimicking it, it's eliminating real thought. I've heard the term critical thinking, and not my whole life, and I had to think about it. What do they mean by critical thinking? And I still think they mean thinking.
Right.
They've had to attach a term to it because there's so little of it going on. And David Brooks wrote a beautiful article in the Atlantic Monthly. I like his name, Dennis Brock, David Brooks. My father's name was Block. There were a lot of famous Blocks, no famous Brocks. Where was I? I totally lost track of that. What was I talking about?
I lost track of it too because I was thinking about Ken Block. That he had written an article in. Shoot.
Yes, David Brooks. He made a wonderful article, but he starts off with something that doesn't go far enough. He's talking about how the Ivy League has kind of ruined America.
Right.
because it's created a dichotomy, a two-class system, those who've been and those who haven't been. And that's obviously that's wrong. But the first thing he says is that intelligence is overrated. And so, I wish I had him here to speak to him and tell him, no, specific, subjective intelligence is overrated. Because intelligence, you can't, if you could define intelligence to me is the ability to adapt to your surroundings. Now, if you take that as a definition, the Australian Aborigine is a genius. And, if he brought Einstein with him out into the desert, Einstein would look like a silly
Useless.
old fool.
Yeah.
So in that place, in that time, who's the genius? If you cannot apply it to something practical, what value is it? Genius is as genius does. You judge a man by their works. So what are you going to do with that genius? Being intelligent does not imply that you're a better person. That's the first mistake. I know a lot of people with their Yale and Harvard, I wouldn't give you 5 cents for their character. And he was making the point, like in my case, they expelled me. I've had to, somebody wanted to know, they asked me to explain my past. I said, look, and they gave me a little box to do it. And I said, I'm not going to fit in that little box. There's no way.
No, sir. No, sir.
No way I'm going to fit in that little box. But
do you think that...
But we advertised. Wait, I need before I forget, because my age, you got to remember everything. Hold on to it. We advertised. We had the gorgeous planet. We also had beautiful women, but that's another whole story. Because for some reason, every culture on this planet said that they had sex with our women. I didn't make this up. They said that.
Right.
And I believe to some extent it might have been true. Anyhow, you have to define intelligence by what it can do. And then you have to say what it can do for what. It's like empowerment, and I've been asked to explain empowerment. Empowerment to do what? And without a goal, it's kind of empty. Intelligence without a moral compass is kind of empty. We have a threat right now with artificial intelligence.
Yes.
We need to pay a lot of attention to that.
Certainly.
I read something in this book that frightened me that I wanted to bring up. This is an underground. Can I show this?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I got this online. It's virtually underground. People who really are into UFOs know about this book. And there's one sentence in here that's very disturbing because it clicks. Whenever I see things click from something I've already read, and there's this connection, I remember it. And he said that the Chinese, Theta Reticula, is a twin star system. The Greys are supposedly coming from that star system. But in this book, they warn us that the Chinese are working with the Greys. I have no idea if that's true whatsoever. But when I always associate, and Betty and Barney Hill, I read more about them, everything I could on them. And she drew a star map, which was later on identified as showing Zeta Reticula, both of them. It's a twin star system. And the Greys might, and then you see it again coming from Bob Lazar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He says that they're from Zeta Reticuli A and Reticuli B. And of course, people who doubt this say, well, he knew because she said it, so he said it. So of course, there's always some way of saying that.
Yeah.
But what if it's true that they are from that particular star system? How many of these beings are we having to deal with on this planet? We did something really stupid in 1946, and we continue to do it afterwards. We blew up an atomic bomb. Now, if somebody on Venus blew up an atomic bomb, we would know about it. We have sensors that would tell us, and we're primitive as hell. We put a big blinking yellow sign, or whatever color is in vogue today, saying we are here, we got stuff, there are people here that you could take advantage of, there are resources here you may want. Even gold, by the way. Gold, for some reason, shows up everywhere.
Yes.
Gold is special.
Yes. Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that, because that's something that I've been reading about recently too, that a lot of the early visitors, in theory, were here because of the gold specifically.
The gold has the highest vibration of any metal, the highest vibrational value. And I don't know how you would measure that or how you would quantify that, silver being a poor second. But, when you see people whose civilizations have been around 6,000 years and they adorn everything in their temples with gold,
Right.
you think it's decorative. Well, they think it's vibrational. They're and they will use it. And the women will wear all the gold they can, and probably most of the gold is in India right now. Yeah. But there's something about gold, and there's something about crystals. When they discovered those giant crystals underground a few years ago,
In the caves you're talking?
yeah, that was incredible. But the lady who was taking people back in time, Dolores Cannon, I'm checking what they're saying to see if it clicks. And I'm looking at one thing in particular that has been incredibly pushed under the rug is Qumran, the community by the Dead Sea that housed the Essenes. The Essenes, and I believe that Jesus was at some point living there, learning from the Essenes. And that first I was trying to figure out, did the Essenes have any connection with extraterrestrials? And they did. Although the Essenes, when they were captured, the Romans finally overran the place. I think it was in the year 63. And whoever was left was tortured because the Romans believed that they had magic. They knew magic. They had studied Solomon. They had studied the books of the seventh book of Moses or fifth book of Moses. And they had abilities in that Essene community that the other people did not know existed. They even talked about a model they had. One of the people who transgressed back said that they had a model of the solar system. And they described the 10th planet, by the way, and that the model was powered by the movement of the Earth itself, and that you couldn't touch it because it would stop it and nobody could get it back up again because it was there as a gift from a prior civilization.
Mm.
There was a civilization before, thousands of years before they were there, that had things. Arthur C. Clarke said, advanced technology would appear as magic to us.
Still, even contemporaneously.
This was magic. It was perpetual motion. Under the planetarium, the Franklin Institute, they have a pendulum that is working. It's like in a 2 or 3 story high atrium. It starts at the very top. A long brass rod comes down, and there's this pendulum. And they will tell you that it's running off of the rotation of the Earth. It is powered by the rotation of the Earth, which is a power source if you know how to use it. So in this transgression of the Qumran Essene community, she said they had a model of the solar system. And there was a lot of things that she said, and they had a library where they would gather knowledge from all over the world and write it down and store it and keep it. That was their function, is to gather knowledge from all over the world. And women, here's the thing, they're worthy of a whole show unto itself. Women had equal rights. Then, they don't even have it now. Then, in the Jewish community, women did not have equal rights. In the Christian community, they did not have equal rights. You name it. The only exceptions you can probably think of that I could think of are Native Americans. The women owned the land. They owned the food, which I thought was pretty good. So there's so many groups have been here during so much periods of time. They could have come and disappeared. When you look at the stone work, here's a clue: smoking gun, a very quiet one. What's going to survive 100,000 years? What's going to survive 10,000 years? Stone. There are these stone blocks. First time I ever saw it was in Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which was a book by Weston Price. Went all over the world examining indigenous people, what happened to their teeth when they suddenly got our food. and he's got all these pictures in the middle of the book, and he shows. I think it was an Incan wall, and the stones were fitting together. They didn't look right. There was something different about these stones. They're much too big. They're much too soft. Their edges were much too polished. And in fact, they seem to have been cast out of almost marshmallow-like material. I mean, vitreous material that they could shape into blocks and then transported by means we do not have now to the site. Some of these blocks were the size of trucks.
Right.
They fit together with such precision, and they were not perfect squares. They would notch into each other. You couldn't put a dollar bill between there. There was no mortar used. And many times you'll see these walls all over the world, and they look remarkably alike. Plain sight. It's in plain sight, people. They look remarkably alike because they all had the same teachers. They all had the same methods. They all had the same techniques. What was common to all these places from South America to Turkey? You know about all those wonderful places. You've got the Pumapunku, Göbekli. I had to, the names are hard to pronounce.
Yes.
Göbekli Tepe. You know about that.
Yeah. So why do you think it is we have such a hard time reconciling things
question.
that seem so obvious?
Our old knowledge just messes us up in the worst way. I think part of that has to do with the God gene. There's something wrong with us. It's as if there's a ghost. There's a ghost in the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and when you look at enough images of people worshiping, you get the feeling that they have to. They feel like they have to worship something.
For sure.
But why? The one most common thing that I believe I don't believe in worshiping, I believe in honoring. The one thing I believe you should respect, and all intelligent cultures except ours believe this, is the people who came before you.
Right.
Who may be in what we call your spirit group. They're people you'll come across them many times in many different lives, and they're not always going to be your father. They might even be your son one day. They might be your sister in one life. You are born over and over again. This is a vessel that we are born into. This ain't no disco. We were put on this planet to overcome adversity, not to have a good time, not to gather shit. We were not put on this planet to do that.
We're not after the bubbles of bliss.
We were put on this planet to learn. If we don't, we're going to have to come back over and over and over again until we get it right.
Right.
That's really what happens. You're faced with, there's no devil. When you die, you're faced with everything you did. You see everything you did wrong. It's in your face. And you have to deal with it because you can't go on. You cannot, you go to the next life. The purpose of your life, the next life, is to work on what you did wrong the last time. And I think that's true. And you don't need to have this, you're going to go to hell stuff thrown at you every 5 minutes. If you knew that you are the devil, the guy in the mirror is the devil, and the people, the esteemed teaches, the Buddhist teaches that the people who are in contact with other civilizations and other worlds understand this. It is a tunnel vision, what we have here. We're educated apes, and we believe that. That we're educated. Well, actually, we're apes. Think of what they took, and I tell this to people to see how they really act. They took the most oversexed animal on the planet and gave him extra intelligence. Okay? Was that really a smart thing to do? I would question that.
Now, maybe we were the right ape at the right time. We just got lucky in that regard.
They say there were 6 species, subspecies of man alive all at one time. When I was a kid, there was one, and then Neanderthal showed up, and then Denisovian showed up, and like, oh my God, 6 species of man? So this was like a tryout, right? Earth was a laboratory.
Not to mention the fact, if you want to dig down the biological part of it, you can talk where we split off with the cephalopods and the amount of intelligence that they actually have, and maybe we weren't the exact one that was thought
The preferred.
Yeah, we just kind of got there. I used to love this is a sort of an aside. At one point, a band I was in won an award, and we got on stage, and instead of thanking everybody for the award and everything, we talked about the theory about how the cephalopods in 20 million years were going to come on to land and take over the earth.
Right.
So yeah, that's been one I've been after for a while.
So,
But you did bring up something I wanted to ask you about. This is definitely a mission drift, and not something that I plan to talk to you about today, but I know something that you have an extensive amount of knowledge on, and that's near-death experiences. When you say when we pass, all of this flashes before our eyes, and we have our time in the in-between, we go again, and all of this in the third, my big operative question for you for that is, what do you feel attributes to the commonality of the reports and NDEs, regardless of times they occurred, cultures they occurred in, or locations they occurred in?
They are actually entering death, but something calls them back. It's not any different. It's just more. They are actually at heaven's gate, if you want to put it. They are at the crossover point. And I think every story is different at that point. Whether or not they continue or they go back. You know, I was reading about a regression on Jesus, that at the right moment he took himself out of his body. He didn't feel any of that pain. And I like to think that we can, when we're in our higher state, that we can learn how to do that we can control all our, to some extent, our destiny. Have you ever done meditation?
Yes, that's actually a funny thing. You should ask me that because, just as an aside, I have spent a lot of time in my life by myself. So inherently, I've done a lot of just sitting around thinking, especially in the 80s and 90s when there was no phone to distract me. But one of the things I used to do was I would climb trees and just sit there with my headphones on and stare off as far as my limited vision could see, and I'd listen to music and think. And I've recently come to a point in my life in the last 6 months or so where I've been able to have some more just straight up time alone on Eric Island. And when I'm on Eric Island, I'm pretty much always listening to music, partly because of my vision and partly because it's ingrained in my life. Maybe one begot the other. But I'm curious, I had the thought that my meditation actually occurs when I'm listening to music. I don't have I feel like maybe I'm off the mark, but I don't feel like my meditation occurs in the sense where you have to sit there and think about clearing your mind. Meditation for me is more if I can give myself a spot where I can think, my mind just will go.
I don't think it makes any difference. To tell you the truth, you were meditating. I don't think you can lump everybody in like that. I think it's a matter of which brainwave is active. You know, there's 3 brainwaves. The one that starts to peak when you're meditating, you were activating that brainwave. It doesn't matter how you do it, you were doing it. You were talking about near-death experience. Ray Moody came up with the expression.
Mm-hmm.
I had him at my home. You see, I don't believe in coincidence. I found out he was living in town, and I made some inquiries, and I had him come over. He was rather aged. I don't know what he's doing now, but Ray Moody created the psychomendium, which is the theater of the mind where you hopefully put people in that meditative state in order to access. DNA is magical. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree.
It's magical. And it's through DNA they're going to realize that we've been tampered with over and over and over again. And Ray Moody had found a technique where he puts them in a completely dark room and they stared at an off-center mirror and just one candle power. Before they ever get in that room, he's got them walking around the property near the lake. He's got them hearing music. You hear music all the time in the between, by the way. I'm full of music. I hear music. That's why I hate Christmas. I start hearing Christmas songs in my head. I can't. I don't want to hear another Christmas song.
Yeah, same.
Well, Ray Moody came to my home and he sat in a chair in my a building I built with my bare hands. Something happens when you work with something with your hands. Whether it's a Japanese sword or it's a
Beautifully made instrument.
guitar or a violin. I built a shed with my hands, every bit of it with my hands. And Ray Moody was sitting in an easy chair in there, and he said to me, the people he put these people in this state, a meditative state, takes them in a room, it's completely dark, and leaves them alone. It is then that they access not the hidden world of spirits, they access their DNA, which has superpowers. People do not understand that. The DNA is much more than what they've told you. There's so much they haven't discovered about it, including the little loops that have been put in it over the years from our alien friends. And he gets them into a state where they begin to be able to speak to their dead relatives, to put it bluntly. And these were intelligent people. And the thing he said to me that really stuck with me, he said, I can't believe how many of them honestly believe they saw something. The words of somebody who didn't in his heart believe that he had held on. People hold on. They hold on to that. And I said, it's like the Gaji. They hold on to that. It's a life preserver for them. His logic, his schooling. You know what he said to my dear wife? He said, I think sometimes I spend too much time in school. And she said to me, he's talking about you. Because I was kicked out of high school in the 11th grade, and I never went back because I'm self-educated. I read. Thank God I can read. And my wife is dyslexic, so reading is hard for her. And I feel that very, very much. And I realized that 1,000 years, the only people who could read in Europe were the Jews and the clergy. Reading's important. Reading would have kept them aware of what's going on in the world. 1,000 years of nothing. We should have been much further ahead. They're further ahead up there. They're further ahead because they didn't have 1,000 years of this stuff to deal with. It was what I'm saying is that effect. Some things reverberate throughout time. Evil can reverberate throughout time. Loss can reverberate. Hurt can be reverberate throughout time. And when you look at the Bible, it reverberates like crazy. Like in my own life, my father did not know how to raise a boy because my father lost his father when he was 7. He had to leave Europe to get out of there, and they left him behind, which is, by the way, something I've always wanted to do, is bring him back somehow. My grandfather, give him a voice. You know, when you come into this world, you can go through it like it's a big disco, or you can think, when am I going to leave? How am I going to make the world a better place? How can I fix this world? How can I fix one person? And this is what the Jews say, start with one soul at a time. And I've always believed that. And I was quite old before I realized not everybody wanted to change the world.
Yeah, same.
This ain't no disco. We're not here for that. You know, and when you come back, you will have a choice of vessels to work with.
What do you think the big part, the big intriguing part of the delusion is right now that everybody has so much invested in it?
I think it's organized religion. That's a delusion that everybody has too much invested in. They've forgotten their ancestors. It's just, I don't know, I'm taking you sideways on this, but it's a matter of displacement. When Columbus came to the New World and they brought the sword and the cross and a bag that he wanted to fill up with gold, I mean, that little event has caused so much harm. That little event. How do you explain to a child who looks at a globe and you say, well, from here down, they all speak one language except for Brazil. They all worship one God, and they're messed up. Same people, In some cases, before Christianity, these people were geniuses. If you look at the Inca, they had an empire that stretched almost the entire length of the South American continent.
Right.
You look at the Maya, they could calculate the orbit of Venus within the smallest degree. They were geniuses in astronomy. And the Aztecs as well, with the calendar. These were some brilliant people. What happened to them is a question that I would put out there. What happened to them?
Well, the popular narrative is Catholicism comes in and ruins it all.
Well, they got yellow fever, too. No, they got yellow fever here with the slaves. Oh, my God. So much of that blends over. I see the same people as persecuting the indigenous people, persecuting the Africans, and persecuting the Jews. I see the same people doing all those, coming back over and over again. Evil does reincarnate over and over again. And so it becomes a challenge over and over again. And that the people in the middle of that bell curve don't do things. Like right now, they're going to be presented very, very soon with the fact that aliens are real. They are visiting here. Why is it they're suddenly letting us know?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you as far as this portion of the show today where I wanted to talk about the UAPs and things. That's the operative bit that I wanted to ask you.
Why are they doing it now?
Why now? And how come it seems to be that people who would have inordinately chalked these things up as sci-fi or now we're paying attention to, why is this now making some kind of break into where mainstream people are not just casually saying, hey, maybe we are being visited? What gives right now?
There's a lot of traits to human beings that you can't get around. We are very, very habitual in some things, okay? When we see something that our imagination can't accept, for a great majority of people, they really don't see it. They turn it off. I don't know what it is, but whenever they get too close to something that scares them, they don't see it.
Right.
And I think having dogma to lean on gives them an out.
Do you think that that's just not, there's less dogma to lean on now since I know we still have religious zealots in every corner.
It is deteriorating. Maybe they figured it out that much of what they believe in is hypocritical.
Yeah, you are seeing a lot more secular ways of living if you don't want to extrapolate it all the way to secular humanism, where at least becoming seemingly more secular in some of our modern civilizations.
Okay, what if all those years that they were worshiping somebody nailed to a cross, they should have been talking to the people in their soul group?
Right.
And by not talking to the people, not recognizing grandfather, and not lighting a candle for grandmom when it's, the Jews light a candle once a year, not recognize, not using their knowledge, not speaking their name.
Right.
That you have made yourself less of a human being. That you have accepted dogma instead of reality. That this person did live. There was a soul there. Now, either that soul disappeared or it didn't. And if it didn't, what the hell are you praying to this deity? Did you even look at the Ten Commandments? Did you read the Ten Commandments? Do you know that Yahweh means no name?
There's a huge group of people that don't even understand that Yahweh is as far back on that ladder as we go right now.
Yahweh means the God with no name. We don't have a picture of him. The other day I was looking at Quora. I read it all the time because it's amazing, the idiocy that crosses over it. But the mixture of genius and idiocy is indicative of our entire species.
I was going to say, that's where we're at right now.
Can you name me one other species of animal where there's somebody so dumb, how do they even feed themselves? And at the same time, Einstein. That dog is like Einstein. He figured out how to open that combination. Did you see that? We are all over the map, and that's because of all that experimentation. That's because of those 6 different subspecies being mixed in there somewhere. That's because of the God gene. They put that in there so they could. One woman was being abducted the other day. It's not a joke. She was actually being abducted. It was like 4th time for her or something. And she says, "Who are you?" as they're taking her out. And he looks at her and he says, "I'm God." That's what they're all taught to say. If the humans question you, you look at them and you, with that Elvis Presley look, and you say, "I'm the king."
Yeah.
So all along, it doesn't mean there's no God. I'm not even get into that with you.
Right.
It means that these guys coming here knew what to say. A little flash, a little this. Star of Bethlehem didn't move like the rest of the stars. You know how many times you can see that out there in Sedona, Arizona right now? You go out there at night or you go out somewhere other place that has a reputation for UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see the Star of Bethlehem over and over again. It would have been so easy for them to set that whole thing up. And I believe that the time Judaism was an abject failure, it already was quite old. It wasn't doing the job. And I think they wanted to interject a whole new character into the scene. And I honestly believe, and I have to be real careful about that, we're all hybrids to some extent. We've been messed with over and over again. So, there's no pure. It's like if you took all those Nazis who hate Jews and you examined their past, there's a Jew in there somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
We're a mixture. We are all hybrids to some extent because we have been modified, accelerated beyond where we should have been. And that we only used it to make bombs. We used it to make guns. And that's another thing. Men should not be in charge. We're horrible. They should just let us repair the cars. We'll take care of it. Women, if I were to make another commandment, it would be to respect the women. Because all the civilization has been plagued by working with one hand tied behind our back. And it might have been our left hand. Or it might have been our right. But we're still living in the dark age when it comes to women.
Do you think that some of that is because
Christianity dictates it?
Yeah.
Organized religion is a man's club.
Exactly.